Now I'm going to have to go to our next panel. For our next two sessions, Adele Nazarian will be the moderator. Adele is a media fellow at the Gold Institute for International Security and a director at Hindu Action. She's a successful international journalist that has covered human rights, foreign policy, national security, and religious freedom across many platforms. Let's welcome Adele.
I want to thank everyone also for joining us here today. It's great to see so many familiar faces, people who I've worked with before, people who I'm seeing for the first time. Today is such a significant day for so many reasons, especially after we reflect on the profound issues, of course, that are facing women in regions impacted by radical jihadist regimes. Of course, we all know what happened 1 year ago today to people in the Middle East, and not just Israelis. There were nationals from various continents, various different parts of the world, and who weren't just Jewish. They were Christians, they were Muslims. Every single, I'd say, ethnicity basically was, and religion was touched by this horrific incident, and unfortunately the ongoing war that is occurring still today in the Middle East. And especially women. We saw the horrible tactics that were used by Hamas, rape, and the horrible things that they use against women in particular. And in this particular panel, the first panel today, we're going to explore the complex interplay of ideology, culture, and personal experiences that shape the oppression of women under Islamist systems and regimes. Each of our esteemed panelists today brings a unique perspective rooted in their own journeys, in fact. We will hear amazing stories from Yasmine Mohammed, who will share her courageous story of leaving Islam and advocating for women trapped in oppressive environments. Soraya M Deen, a devoted Muslim feminist and interfaith advocate, who will provide insights on navigating faith and feminism in contexts where women's rights are severely restricted. And we will also, last but not least, hear from Habiba Ashna Marhoon, who has been directly targeted by the Taliban for her activism. And we'll learn about the dire circumstances of women who are currently facing under their regime. As we delve into this conversation, I encourage all of you to share not just your expertise, but your personal narratives, as they hold the key to understanding the broader implications of women's oppression in these contexts. So I want to start off by, welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to, just start on reflecting on your own experiences. I want to ask you, we'll start with each and every single one of you, just to ask, how has your personal journey shaped your perspective on the treatment of women under radical jihadist regimes? I'd love to start with you, Yasmine.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Adele. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conference. And I especially want to thank you for your comment about how this is an interplay between ideology, culture, and personal experience. That's incredibly relevant, incredibly important. I find that so often people just want to focus on one of those aspects. And it is really important that we touch on how all of these aspects are all related. And at the end of the day, the way that it affects women is, of course, the most significant. So to tell you about my personal story, my father was born and raised in Gaza. My mother is from Cairo, Egypt. But I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. And I grew up in a very strict religious home, in an Islamist home. In fact, the household names for me were like Sayyid Qutb, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Hassan al-Banna, all of these Islamist heroes. My mother was a scholar at Al-Azhar University, and she was the head of the Islamic Studies department at the Islamic School. And so I have a very deep understanding of the Islamist ideology. So much so that when I was 19, I was forced into a marriage with a terrorist, a member of Al Qaeda. And he was chosen for me, and I quote, my mother said, because I found a man who was strong enough to control you. So the idea behind that there is that this woman, me, this girl, was a little bit too much of a critical thinker. You know, she asked too many questions. She demanded safety for herself, and it was unacceptable. I should have just shut my mouth and got in line and did what I was supposed to do. And because I wasn't doing that, my family felt that marrying me off to a jihadi would keep me in line. And in all honesty, it worked. Of course it worked, because that's what happens when you're covered head to toe in black niqab and you're imprisoned in the house. You're forced to endure being beaten and being raped. You know, you submit. You know, what am I going to be fighting against? I'd been fighting my whole life, and by then I was completely exhausted. And it wasn't until I had my daughter with this jihadi that I found the internal strength to finally push back and break these mental shackles that had been indoctrinated into me. And it was because of my intense desire to protect my daughter and to make sure that she didn't live the same life that I had lived. So I was able to thankfully break the cycle there. I was able to stop this abuse from continuing to the next generation from my lineage anyway. But of course, this lineage is global. You know, I was able to do that for myself and for my daughter, but you know, we're here talking about jihadists and how they treat women on October 7th. You know, like you mentioned, it wasn't just Israeli people, it wasn't just Israeli women. They killed Arab, Muslim, Bedouin women. You know, the sexual assaults and the rape on Israeli women was especially heinous. But it's no surprise to any of us who have been paying attention all these years. We've seen the Islamic regime do the same thing to young women in Iran. We all know about Mahsa Amini and the Women Life Freedom Movement. We know about women that have been raped in the prisons in Iran. We know about the Yazidi women and how they were raped and bought and sold as as slaves in Iraq and Syria by ISIS. We know about the Christians in Nigeria and how they were by Boko Haram, how they kidnapped young girls. We know about Hindu girls in Pakistan being raped and forced into marriages. We know about British girls being stuck into these rape gangs. We know about Germany. It goes on and on and on, right? This is like the topic of our discussion today. It's a global jihad, but this global jihad specifically targets women, and it is most specifically heinous to women. And not just in these extreme cases like I described, but the way that they treat women, as you mentioned, as a culture, not just as the jihad or as an Islamist ideology, but how women are treated in these cultures is literally just leading up to these heinous crimes against women that the jihadis are perpetrators of. So yes, it's my personal experience that I've written about in my book, but on my podcast, I bring so many women from all over the world to share their personal experiences. And unfortunately, we all have so much in common.
Yasmine, first of all, could you share with the audience the name of your podcast as well so that they can be more familiarized with it?
Sure. It's very simply called the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. So it initially was called Forgotten Feminists because I did focus on speaking to women, women who made me proud, women who've overcome and who've persevered. But now I've expanded it to speak to different men, women all over the world on different topics. But it is mostly focusing on people who have overcome you know, this ideology and the results of it.
I mean, your story is so incredible. It's my God, there are so many women who are silently suffering still to this day, and I am certain they reached out to you if they're able to. I mean, my God, I have the chills, and it's funny because I think we've known each other for about over a decade, but this is the first time we're kind of speaking together face to face in a conference setting, which is so crazy to think of, right? Considering the amazing work that you've done and how much there's cross-pollination between what we're doing. I also want to point out that your book, Unveiled, that's behind you, in your book, you discuss literally how the West sometimes enables radical ideologies, right? Um, it's something that I'd love to talk to you more about. And I wanted to ask you also how this dynamic contributes to the ongoing oppression of women in radical regimes. If you'd be open
Yeah.
to discuss.
Great questions. So first of all, how does the West empower these radical Muslims? We can see that happening all over the West right now, with it being October 7th and the support still for Hamas, for Hezbollah, for the Houthis, for the Islamic regime of Iran. We can see it so much more clearly today than when I was writing about it in my book. People were still thinking that I was being an alarmist. I had to self-publish my book because people couldn't see what I was seeing because they didn't have our perspective. They didn't have our understanding. They were seeing things from their vantage point. But of course, now they can see. Unfortunately, now everybody can see how our capitulation to these jihadists in the West is really leading to our own demise. We are slowly causing, you know, it's suicide. It's suicide of our societies. And how does that contribute to the disempowerment of women? Let me tell you an example of a woman named Mariam from Iran who told me about when she was during the, before the Women Life Freedom Movement, there was a campaign called White Wednesdays that was started by Masih Alinejad. And she was one of the women who would be waving a white hijab. And she was knocked over by the police, by the IRGC. She broke her leg. They imprisoned her. And when she was in prison, they were admonishing her by saying to her, look at these women in Europe. Look at these journalists, politicians, you know, these feminist leaders all over the Western world, how they wear the hijab and how they respect the hijab, and shame on you, an Iranian woman, you can't respect the hijab. These women are used as a literal bludgeon to attack the real feminists in these Muslim majority countries that are fighting against these extremist ideas that are causing us not only harm and abuse and torture and imprisonment, but death as well. You know, we could tell stories about women who have been killed everywhere from Algeria to Zimbabwe over the hijab, you know, but what do we see happening in the Western world? Hijab on every flat surface, on the cover of magazines, in Disney movies, on apps, everywhere, normalizing this tool of misogyny, this tool of oppression that gets women killed. They are beyond normalizing it. They are celebrating it. They're putting it on Barbie's head. It's like a mockery of us, you know, as we are bleeding and as we are dying, they are pretending that this is a symbol of feminism and empowerment, and they are putting it up on a pedestal. They are doing the work of the Islamists. They are no different. They are carrying water for the Islamists, and they are causing harm to all freedom-loving feminist women around the world who are trying to fight against this ideology.
Thank you for this. And you know what it is? It's one thing to have freedom of choice. If someone decides on their own that they wish to have a hijab, they wish to cover themselves, That's their choice. They've done they studied it. They feel this resonates with them. Great. But what drives me absolutely up the wall is seeing how these women are forced, as you said, to wear these coverings. And then you have in the same exact scenario, it's a sweltering summer day, let's say. Meanwhile, their husbands are there in shorts and a t-shirt, able to, cool off. They don't have to be under this heavy, heavy thing. And then nearby, there's a woman that's half naked, for example, wearing skimpy shorts, and here these men are ogling at them, and it's absolutely disgusting, and it's just so disrespectful to the woman. And there's just such a dynamic of hypocrisy in so many levels. And so thank you for, discussing your personal experience and for helping people today to understand that this is a true problem. And the media, of course, doesn't help with that. The media maybe has been forced now to come around and to report the reality on the ground. And I hope to see more of that. But I think it's really because of people like yourselves, women here today, who they're being forced to speak the truths to whatever degree they're allowed to, let's say. I'd love now to go across before I get back to you, because I want to get to all our panelists first. Soraya Deen. Soraya, you've also had a very, very similar, struggle in terms of, dealing with the radical aspect of being a Muslim, and you've been a Muslim feminist and interfaith advocate, working with many different faiths as well. I wanted to ask you, how do you navigate the balance between faith and feminism, especially when it comes to conversations about women's rights in Muslim majority societies?
Thank you, Adele, and my sincere apologies to my colleague and sister Yasmine, because for me, Adele, it is so hard to embark on this topic because there's a rotten core in my faith that I was not aware of. And when I hear stories like what has happened to Yasmine and thousands of other women, sometimes I have to go on my knees and even hide myself. It is so bad. But then I remember I am not exempt from this either. Because the risks involved are tremendous to speak up, but nevertheless I do, because according to the Islamists, challenging the status quo alone makes you an apostate, and you see the dangers of this. I remember several years ago, my friend Rabia, she opened a mixed gender mosque at Berkeley. And I was invited to be the imam. I was called to lead the prayer. So I go in there, I pray, and right next to us is the Zaytuna Institute, supposed to be one of the most liberal Islamic colleges in the United States. And it was full of students. Not one student showed up for our opening of the mosque. Several days later, there was a contingent of Girl Guides from some region in San Francisco, closer to where the mosque was, who had collected $350 by selling cookies to come and support our cause. So that is the level of disengagement we see in the Muslim world. If you hear some noise, I'm at the National Mall. We are having a fabulous event commemorating October 7th. Organized by the Philos Project. And Luke Moon of the Philos Project just said, let's stop calling out, bring them home, because the terrorists are not going to bring them home. Let's say, let them go. And something I want us to remember, there's something hopeful that's happening at this end, is that there's a large contingent of Christian voices. And that is heartening, because I think it's a time for the Christians to really join the level of hatred that is happening in our country. And I'm sure that this will have a ripple effect on the Muslim women's voices that are trying to highlight our lack of dignity, our loss of self-worth because of Islamist agenda. Now, I grew up in Sri Lanka, a very liberal country. We elected the first woman prime minister. I was a practicing lawyer. So I knew the Islam that was not what I see today. we were taught the 5 pillars. You say God is one, you pray 5 times a day, then you fast, then you give charity, and then towards the end of your life, you go to perform Hajj. And this jihadi extremism that is spreading its tentacles into subjugation of women is a serious one. Today, we know that the Sharia laws that are being implemented in Iran, forcing women to wear the hijab, then in Afghanistan, where children, women are not allowed to have an education, in Pakistan, where there's honor killings, all that is rooted in this jihadism that we are here to speak about and talk how we can dismantle them. So for me personally, the struggle is ongoing, but the cause is larger than the struggle. Because I myself, when I was when I took my daughter to Paris on her 16th birthday, I entered the Grand Mosque of Paris. There was a man who was monitoring what we were wearing, and he brought my daughter and me a long drab hijab. I mean, I was very modestly dressed. I know better to cover my hair and cover my feet and all of that. And we were compelled to get into that garb. And then I was looking for the place for the women to pray, and it was a dingy room. Now, mind you, this is in the heart of France, in Paris. We were given that dingy place, and my daughter, she was just 16. She said, "Mom, you said the mosques will be different in Paris. It's not. It's the same. We were relegated to the most dilapidated place in that mosque, while the men took hold of the best halls and they were praying. And that doesn't end there. So the struggles are immense. The struggles continue. I can tell you story after story after story about the mistreatment of Muslim women. And I believe it is that women have lost their agency in the Muslim world to have a conversation with their creator. And yes, and it is like we are told in every mosque what to think, not how to think. And the Muslim men in beards, even in Sri Lanka today, the Saudi-funded mosques, now, of course, they have stopped it because I think with MBS, things are changing. They take care youth, teach them the Wahhabism, and they plant them in poor countries like third world countries, which have economic necessity. So the corruption has been pervasive. But let's forget that part of the world, Adele. Let's talk about America. What are we doing here? I mean, I take the Chatham, I go by the Chatham House rules because I can't name the names. I live in DC. I live in DC. Every meeting I go into, they talk about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism at an equal length. And there are top US officials who are sitting and watching this and listening to this, and they're not interrupting what is relevant is there's no Islamophobia, and that word by itself is a construct. It stifles reform. So when Western countries just don't support us, it's a big struggle. And you spoke at length. Our speakers earlier spoke at length about Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a bomb waiting to erupt. Ansarullah, the Bangla, is one of the extreme terrorist organization. Recently, their leader, I think he's Rahimi, he was given a helicopter by the state to attend his sister's funeral. Now, this is the students' movement that they're saying happened. It is not a students' movement. It is state-sponsored. That is where I want to take this conversation. What are we doing in the West? Look at us. We're small-time activists with big goals and big visions. When the government doesn't support this, when the government is endorsing or looking the other side, Kamala Harris went to the Islamic Center of Los Angeles and said, Muslims, we have to get rid of this word extremism. She has no idea of what we Muslim women are going struggling in the periphery to make a change. So going back to Bangladesh, we have 56 terrorist organizations, and of which 6 are highly active. And I saw the other
Not the
day,
most active.
yeah, Yunus was at the UN, and Bill Clinton was introducing him, tapping him on his shoulders, and they were introducing the students who were heading this revolution in Bangladesh that happened. So just imagine, Adele, the level of pushback that we have. But I am a community organizer, so I believe in power. Power is building. Power is with people. So what we are doing, yes, we are doing is we are converting women to think like us, and to stand up and express themselves. So these are the things that we are working on, because and I have a daughter. I have a daughter, and I'm not going to give this fight up, because radical Islamists cannot hijack the Islam I grew up in. And then again, we call out extremism that is inherent in some of our scriptures. We
And
cannot.
Soraya,
Yeah. Yes.
thank you for pointing that out. That the Islam that you grew up with, it's not the Islam that you're seeing around you today, because truly it's been hijacked and by these radicals who are trying to politicize it for their own purposes. And people are sheep at the end of the day, the majority of them. And before I get to Habiba, I just want to share a personal story as well. Wherever I go in the world, I love to go to a masjid, to a synagogue, to a church, to a Hindu, to a mandir. It's something that I do, right? No matter where I am. And when I was a few years ago, it was 5 years ago, I was in Lusaka, Zambia. And I went similarly, and I went to the masjid, and I decided to go to the women's section, and I asked, "Where is the women's entrance, please?" And they said the masjid was here, and they said the women's entrance was over there. And so I said, "But wait, that's not even connected to the main masjid, the main, place for the place of worship." And they go, "Yes, the women's entrance is over there." I go there and I see it's actually not even connected to the mosque. And I spoke with several of the women there who were actually, I believe, Wahhabist, and they are from the UK, and they were from Saudi originally. And they've said they literally believe the most pure interpretation of the Quran, which is that women are not meant to go to the mosque and pray, that they are meant to stay home and only educate children. And for me, I was like, this is not the Muslims that I know who are, one of my best friends are practicing Muslims, for example. And I have my best friends who are not even practicing anymore, who have left the faith. And none of them believe this. So that experience was very shocking for me, was jarring for me. And it scared me, to be honest with you. And then you have the incident that you talked about, how there was an attempt in the US, I believe you said, to actually get a mixed thing of men and women in a mosque, and no one showed up. Meanwhile, you have MBS in Saudi Arabia holding mixed events and trying to modernize the country. And
well, now he is, after he finished supporting this global jihad and funding it, basically. Now he's going in a different direction.
The damage he's done, I mean, is borderline irreparable. It's irreparable in our lifetime. It's terrible. Yes.
So I want to jump now to Habiba, who's also been a very dear friend for many years, and it's so great to see you here. And you've also had a very harrowing, similarly experience with the Taliban in Afghanistan. I mean, you actually were also directly targeted by the Taliban for your activism. You used to work very closely with the government, the previous government, and I want to know, how do you find, of course, I'd love to know your personal perspective of how do you, but I'd love to know also, how do you find the strength to continue with your work in the face of such personal danger that you and your husband even has a story of how he got out? I mean, it's crazy. I'd love to know how you find the strength.
Well, thank you so much. My husband's pretty safe, but I was on one of the lists back in the day when I was in Afghanistan. The 100 people list when came out, and apparently my name was 28 something on the list. Well, I'm going to start from here. We talked about the MBS, so of course he's going to normalize situation back in Saudi, because now Afghanistan, they have Afghanistan to radicalize as much as they want. So they don't have to worry about radicalization at all. As far as personal courage is concerned, I think my story is not different than any other woman activist and who is here right now and any other feminist. We're always driven by our experiences, and our experience often teaches throughout the way. The first time when the Taliban came in, I was a child, I was in school, I wasn't able to go to school. So we were refugees. We had to leave Afghanistan the first time when they came in. We were in a car. It was a very, the cars were moving from one place to another and the bullets were being fired at us. But we left Afghanistan. We were able to leave. We became refugees. That was the first time that happened. Also, the first day the Taliban came in, I lost my grandfather. And then afterwards, the second time I'm here sitting with all of you. Both of the times, I'm someone who has experienced what happens when the Taliban come in and when the extremists actually take over your countries. In the West, we often romanticize Islamic governments. We often romanticize Sharia law, and people romanticize what happens when you have an Islamic government. I am an example of what happens when you have an Islamic government. Let me tell you what happens when you have Sharia law and Islamic government. Currently, we have every single terrorist organization you could possibly think of operating and working from Afghanistan, including Hamas. We spoke about Bangladesh. There is a conference in Bangladesh celebrating Al-Aqsa. They call it the Jihad of Al-Aqsa right now, where Mullah Fazlur Rahman and Maulana Kabir is the deputy to the Prime Minister of Taliban, celebrating it in Bangladesh right now in one of the conferences, celebrating what happened on October 7th in Israel. The jihadists and the Islamists often see women as, of course, I'm diverting from your question because I don't think I can talk about myself for hours, but I think the topic is more important to address and also talk about how important it is to understand what the jihadists think, because I know what happens. And I think it's important for others to know, for our audience to know what happens when you don't oppose the jihadists at the right time. The jihadists right now are working in Afghanistan, and they're going everywhere attacking women, because the easiest way to control in our culture what money cannot do, what bombs cannot do, women are able to do that. Relationships are able to do that. We often think about the Taliban and extremism. We are, they're, the Muslim Brotherhood, and we Deobandi and everything, and we overanalyze it nonstop. We need to humanize that situation, what's happening. Humanize it, break it to the small human relations, and you would know what they're doing. And it's very easy. It's not that hard. We know they have connections with all the other Muslim extremists. We know they have connections with all the other extremist groups. What we don't talk about is how they use human relations to build these connections by using women. For example, right now, the Taliban say they don't have any connection with Al-Qaeda, but they have family. They have family relations with Al-Qaeda. They have their daughters married to them, and they have their daughters married to them. Very simple things by using women to build their network and their connection among the Islamist groups, among the terrorist groups. That's what we need to understand, why women for these Islamists, or they use women's body and woman itself is actually a battleground for them. Who they want to have friendship with and who do they want to have as an enemy. You look at those networks, those connections, they're always women that they use.
So you're bringing up a really, really valid, important point here. I mean, you look at individuals like Tashfin Malik, who is the shooter from Pakistan who radicalized her husband also, the San Bernardino shooting that happened in 2015, I think it was. You have all these incidences where if you look at the men, for example, who are actually, let's say, the ones carrying out the jihad, there's more often than not a woman somewhere there who perhaps even radicalize them. And that's not really reported in the media. And so I have to ask, you know, all of you here, like, you know, you've all been, you know, vocal advocates for women who are trapped in these environments. And, you know, how does the psychological manipulation within these regimes prevent women from being able to recognize their own oppression? You know, you have women like Linda Sarsour who's standing up there and saying that I mean, she's just a heinous example of that. I'm sorry, she just is. And she doesn't represent, in my opinion, Muslim women. I don't think most Muslim women really agree with her if asked. But really, psychological oppression, maybe she's a prime example. How basically are they prevented, these women from these regimes, from recognizing their own oppression? If you ladies wouldn't mind answering that for the audience. Whoever
Well,
wants to.
women are conditioned from the beginning. I can give you example of Afghanistan right now. I was sent to madrasa because it was shame for a woman not to know your religion properly because you will be raising kids. Those women are conditioned, and also they're isolated from the rest of the world. It's very easy to brainwash them compared to other people. It's very easy. For example, I will give you example of Kandahar. Everybody knows the name Kandahar, obviously, Afghanistan. And Kandahar, it's a shame for a woman to have a smartphone.
Wow.
But every woman, if you have a daughter, a child daughter, she should go to madrasa until 9th grade. You must send your daughters to madrasa until 9th grade. But if you have an iPhone, if you have a smartphone, that is seen down upon, because automatically what they have done is they have sort of demonized every single thing that would connect you to the outer world. They have demonized every single thing that would give you a bigger circle, that would open
That's
your
tough.
eyes towards the world.
That's a really, really tough battle to fight alone. And Yasmine, I'd love for you to talk about that, because you were ganged up upon by not only your mother, your own family, probably the community also. Would love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I completely agree with Habiba. Obviously, in Afghanistan, it's at a different level because you have the Taliban controlling the women. But the mindset, that mindset can be anywhere in the world because it just travels in the brains of these people, right? So I grew up in a very similar situation where being educated, there's no way I could imagine that I would ever be able to go to university. My mom would laugh at me and she'd say, "For what? Because you think you're going to do what? Get a job? What are you going to do? And why would you ever want to get educated? Your job is to be a good wife and to make more Muslim babies so that they can die fi sabilillah, hopefully. You know, that's your whole purpose in this world." And so if being educated, being independent, being a critical thinker, being an artist, being, you know, creative, if all of these things are demonized constantly, and the only thing that is celebrated and supported is memorizing Quran, wearing proper hijab, you know, whatever it is, going to the madrasa, doing the halaqas, you know, those are the things that are celebrated. Those are the things that uplift your family's honor. You know, it's like if we go back to the hijab, for example, and the way we're told as little girls, you know, if you want to be a clean candy that's wrapped up, you know, then you look at the difference between this filthy lollipop that's covered in dirt and covered in bugs, and look at this beautiful lollipop that's covered up in a wrapper. Which one do you want to be? You know, it's these kinds of coercive methods constantly, like Habiba said, from the very beginning, from day one, you're told shame. Shame in Arabic is aib. We're constantly being told as girls. You were talking about the smartphone is shame. You know, everything is shameful. A girl now in Afghanistan, a woman's voice is aura. A woman's voice is shameful. So that's the way it was in my family too, you know, but of course it's very different when you have a terrorist organization that is, you know, infringing these these rules on the women in the same way that they are in Iran, for example. But these were the rules in my home too. All of me was shameful, and it was my duty as a girl to not harm my family's honor by letting that shame out in the world. So I have to cover myself. I have to lower my eyes. I have to lower my voice. I have to diminish myself as much as possible. So if you think about that environment, Adele, it's no surprise that these women are not growing and flourishing and fighting back and supporting each other, because it's
ends up dead.
planned.
Yeah.
It's planned from the very beginning. They know that these girls, if they realize the power that they have, then these men are, the patriarchy's screwed, right? So they have to make sure that these girls from the very beginning never realize their power. They need these girls to believe that they are weak, that they are submissive, that they are less than men, right? الرجال قوامون على النساء. They have to be told these things all the time. We're told about the hadith that tell us that women are less intelligent than men, right? They indoctrinate us with self-hate and this belief that we are nothing and that we are small and that we are less than and we diminish ourselves. And then what do mothers do? They diminish their daughters. They take them to get FGM forced on them. They take them to get into forced marriages like my mother did to me, and it continues.
Which is actually interesting also because FGM, and correct me if I'm wrong, is more of a cultural phenomenon. It's not actually from the Quran, but women have started in certain parts of the world culturally incorporating it who are Muslim. And it's like, it's crazy.
Even the
and
hijab is not in the Quran.
There you go.
But it doesn't matter. If they can use it to control women, they will use it.
That's what it's the
Yeah,
underlying
and
only women.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and it goes back to this fundamental right of the man to control the woman's body.
Correct.
So I think these
Yes.
women wake up and these men wake up and they think, how can we control something of this woman? So they control the hair, they control the voice, they control the shoes they wear. I had once, I had once an imam, a scholar from Al-Hazza who lived with me because when he came, I lived right by our mosque. He said to me, sister, you can't wear high heels because that noise is bad. I mean,
Yeah.
this is Los Angeles. So I think what needs to happen is, as Yasmine said, we have to educate the women, young girls, to say they have power. And then I don't know, but you might not agree with me. So I go back to some examples because in order to convert minds, you need examples. So we look at the life of Khadija, the first wife of the Prophet. That's something the Muslim world will wake up as long as I quote that, because they have no idea of contextual theology. They're embroiled in received theology. So if you tell them that, oh, listen, Khadija was a businesswoman. She managed men and women, and she had a business. Why we need to strive to be some independent like that. Just to put a little idea into their head is something big today in the Muslim world, because I blame the West a lot, Adele. I can't tell you enough. The quiescence, the disregard for the real change that needs to happen, and the disempowerment of moderate Muslim women's voices.
Yes.
Pervasive. I mean, if you look at what happened on October 7th, how long did the UN take to condemn that? I mean, look at these UN. I'm thinking these are women who are educated. They went to Harvard, Stanford, and some good place to study, and they're struggling to admit that Hamas raped, mutilated, and murdered women. So I rest my case here. It's so hard for us.
I have a former congressional candidate who shall not be named, Chatham House Rules, who served in the US military, who literally came out and told me that she believes Hamas is a political party, just like the Democrats and Republicans.
Wow.
Yes. And I told her, don't ever run for office in the US. I said, you
Or
just
anywhere.
go hide and don't show yourself. I said, this is crazy. So
I think that Adil, I'm sorry to jump in here. That's very important. What you just said, that for this person telling you, we take it very lightly. This is very dangerous for the world. This is normalizing terrorism.
Yes, it is.
Remember, this is what we are facing right now. We are facing the UN directly, and I'm going to say this without Chatham House rules. You can quote me on this outside anywhere you want. The UN is directly involved in negotiating, talking, and normalizing the Taliban that are considered terrorist groups around the world, and they continue to do this with other groups as well. The UN, remember, Amina Mohammed came and said, the Taliban are doing everything to women. Maybe they will not do it if they are recognized by the international society and community. Knowing that the Taliban are influenced and they're inspiring thousands of terrorists around the world. You can actually, Hamas said that they were inspiring by the Taliban who came to the power.
There you go.
So,
yeah.
This is very important. What you just said is a very, very, it's a red flag for all of us.
Yeah,
it's a red
that's
flag.
the subtitle of my book, is how they empower these radical Muslims, for sure.
And thank you so much. I'm so glad I brought that up and we were able to all, talk about these personal experiences and examples. I mean, you ladies are all incredible. I want to ask, when it comes to educating the public, right? Of course, the battle is really in the Middle East for the women who are suffering and struggling in the midst of it, but also here in the US. We're seeing a desensitization, as you said. We're seeing a coddling of these radical extremist ideologies. And I want to ask everyone here, considering the educational system where it has its own issues, right? Where there's a certain, left-wing think that kind of, completely slashes the thought of having any kind of outside perspective that doesn't agree with their own, and how they're literally coddling this jihadist kind of ideology. How do we incorporate these real experiences and as part of the college curriculum, for example, on women's studies, right? The rape, forced conversions, the tools for ethnic cleansing. How do we work to make these more mainstreamed so that everyday people can understand that actually this is the enemy at their doorstep, instead of having these sorts of courses be constantly, chopped off the block and saying they're not allowed to be part of what's being taught. It's a big challenge. I'd love to know, Yasmine, what do you think?
Yeah.
Is there
That is a great question. And just yesterday, actually, I had a conversation last night with an academic and this morning with an academic, both of them telling me about how their research is being thwarted because they do not like the direction that it's going, that the evidence is showing things that they don't want it to show. You know what I mean? And so the first woman, both of them are in women's studies. Both of them are in gender and women's studies. The first woman was talking about modesty clothing, and the second woman was talking about domestic violence. And in both of their universities, one is a university in France and the other is in a university in Canada, both of these women have faced slander, absolute slander to their name and to their reputation as researchers and as academics, because the evidence that they're bringing forward is that these are issues that are dominant in Muslim communities. So that's literally what the evidence is showing, but they don't want the research to show something that they are going to say is Islamophobic, bigoted, racist, whatever. So they don't even want to acknowledge the problem. They don't even want to look at the problem. So I don't know what we can do other than keep pushing. These two women are amazing and I'm proud of them and I support them 100%. And I've spoken to many other women in many other universities all around the world who are trying to do research in these fields. And it is always difficult. They always have to find back doors and different ways of saying it and yada, yada, yada. But we just have to keep pushing. We just have to to keep pushing until, you know, we have to fight bad ideas with good ideas. These women need us to speak up for them. We are all, thankfully now, in privileged circumstances where we can speak for so many millions of women who are in no position to speak for themselves. Look at Habiba right now. The level, the amount of pressure on you, I can't even imagine. You know, like you have your entire country full of women that their voices are not even allowed to be heard right now. And so you
Absolutely.
feel so compelled. You feel so compelled to just to keep pushing forward and to keep screaming for these women. And that's what we have to just keep doing that. I don't know what else to do.
You know, we're coming to a close. This is definitely not enough time for this panel here today. I mean, not enough close. We have to do another one for sure with everyone here. I want to ask just in closing, okay, for everyone, considering the harrowing experiences that you've all been through, considering what honestly we're up against, what women in the Middle East and the rest of the world under these jihadist ideological regimes are up against, right? What gives you hope for the future of women's rights in these countries dominated by these jihadist regimes? And are you worried for America's future? I kind of wanted to put that in there too. I'd love closing remarks. Soraya, do you want to go first? And then we'll...
Yes, I think we should look to Iran. Those women are so brave. If they can stand, we can stand. You know, today we know that in Iran, the dissident women are shot in one eye. The level of brutality. So countries like ours, like the United States, that has power and leverage, it has to stand up. I call out again, and let us who are women and the grassroots also continue the work. It's not just left for the West. You know, I don't say that and absolve myself from responsibility. And as Yasmine said, we got to continue to do it. And the beauty of this work is, Adele, that there's a collective consciousness. When we have 100 women, the 101st woman will say yes. You know, we don't have to convert all 10,000. That's a scientific experiment they did at Stanford with the 100 monkey theory, where they kept on wiping the potato with sand. Up to the 100 monkey, no monkey ate it. Thereafter, every monkey began to eat it. So we need a very good PR campaigns. We need new educational institutions. We need government backing, and we need to organize and mobilize women. Thank you.
Absolutely. Habiba, would you like to go next? And I'd love to close out with you, Yasmine.
Thank you so much. Well, we spoke about what to do. Currently their case of gender persecution, dragging the Taliban to the ICJ court. We are working on that. There's a huge group of women try to bring Taliban to the court and then able to, and that's only for state. You could do that. You can bring in them to the ICJ if they are a state. For non-state actors, what we can do is find your ally, get together. That's the first thing. Find allies, get together, form a coalition, and then we can work together. As far as am I scared about the United States? Of course I am. I love democracy, Adele. I love being able to vote. But you know what I'm scared of? Voting at the same time. That's a very, one vote is a very powerful thing. And that's what the Islamists right now are using, mobilizing students, mobilizing others. And that's what scares me. The ability to vote is a privilege. And when it's given to the right people, you get the right results. But when it's given to the wrong people, it's chaos. The elections are here. And that's what I'm scared of. That's what I'm scared about. I really hope that we are able to mobilize, work together, and vote for the right people, and also educate people regarding the Islamists and the country and the effects of it on the security of the country. I was talking to a friend of mine. I heard about some meetings in Iran and others, and I warned everyone a month and a half before anything happens in Israel. Am I scared of something happening in the United States? Ask every Afghan who has worked in the previous government, and they will tell you yes. We are scared of what could happen in the United States. We're scared of something similarly happening like 9/11 or worse, because of the presence of every single terrorist group in Afghanistan right now. because they are mobilizing them, they're training them, they're giving them places, they're giving them. Haqqanis are able to travel around the world. Imagine the ability that they could do the work, they could do the allies, they could find the terrorist organizations they're able to talk to and bring into that country back and work with them. It's a very dangerous thing. We are very scared. We are worried about the United States. We need to get together, work together, and do something to stop that and counter the Islamists inside the country and outside as well.
And Habiba, you're right. There is unfortunately a very startling and scary incidents, if you look historically, of terrorist-related activities happening very close to election years. So just praying that everyone can remain safe. Yasmine, I'd love to hear your perspective also, please.
Yeah, so like Soraya mentioned, we see the women in Iran with the Women Life Freedom Movement. We see women in Afghanistan, even despite the Taliban, we see them coming forward, and we see women in Yemen, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia. We see women from all over the world, in all of these Muslim majority countries, speaking up and fighting against the these systems that are meant to hold them down. Women are being imprisoned over these issues. They're being killed, striving for their feminist ideals. And what we're not doing in the West is we're not supporting those women. So like Habiba was saying, instead we are supporting groups like the Taliban, right? Thinking that we can befriend them. The Minister of Women in Canada referred to the Taliban as my brothers. She referred to them as. So this is Canada, right? This is what we're dealing with right now. And so as long as here in the West we are supporting the Islamists instead of supporting the freedom fighting, open-minded liberal thinkers and feminists in these areas of the world, then yes, of course, I am scared for the future of America. I'm scared for the future of Europe. I'm scared for the future of the West in general. If we keep on going down this road, if we don't turn it around and start being more, I don't know, awake, paying more attention, being more strategic, then yeah, what I'm seeing right now on October 7th, the support for the terrorist groups, the support for the Islamic regime of Iran, it's terrifying. So yeah, absolutely, I'm scared. And I think that this was a very important conference to bring attention to this. And I hope that people do listen. We have to do what we can to get our message out there.
Ladies, I can't thank you enough for being here today on the 1-year anniversary of this horrific incident and for sharing your own experiences. You're so amazing and beautiful, all of you. And I'm so blessed to know all of you. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all very, very soon. And God bless you. We're going to go to our next panel. And I'm just going to do a transition. If you could, if you could help us with that. I know our next panelists are meeting. Thank you. Thank you. Please stay on though. Please stay on for the next panel. Going to just find our next panelists, and I'm going to add them to our here. Second. Okay, actually I'm gonna need help with the pins here. Let's see. Give me 1 second, everyone. Just going to take a brief, give me 1 second, everyone. We're just going to do a brief little reprieve here. Whoever is handling our tech. Okay, perfect.